Happy Friday Eve, everybody. This is the Horn Takes podcast, your very rough around the edges Texas sports talk destination. I'm your host, Sean Redfern. It's Deep Dive Thursday. On Deep Dive Thursday, we're going to have Sean's 4 big questions of the game for this weekend's game against the BYU Cougars. We'll do a deep dive into those BYU Cougars. We'll do a big statistical analysis of where Texas stands right now statistically, where the BYU Cougars stand statistically, where both of those schools' schedules to this point stand statistically, and what that all means for the game on Saturday. We'll have some random college football thoughts. They're really not random. They're all about Texas, including some Texas roster updates this week. For those of you that don't know, we go Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, Friday at 12 noon Central Time. Been doing that for a few weeks now. Love it. Much better than the old format. Shows were getting too long. Wasn't as engaged. Really enjoying going every day except for Wednesday. I wish I could go Wednesday. Just can't make it work. Check us out on Twitter, TikTok, and YouTube at Horn Takes. Follow and subscribe, folks. Won't cost y'all a thing. Help me out. I appreciate the support. If you guys just like to listen to podcasts, you can also subscribe to our podcast at horntakespodcast.buzzsprout.com or anywhere that you listen to podcasts. Sean's 4 big questions of the game for this game, BYU Cougars. Let's get into it. I think the number one question for me, and I try to do these in like order of importance. I definitely did them in order of importance this time. Will the Texas defense get back on track, or will they make it 3 in a row? We've had 2 really poor defensive performances in a row. The Oklahoma game, tons of breakdowns. The Houston game, tons of breakdowns. Let Donovan Smith go for 378 yards passing. Just way too many big plays through the air in both of those games. Lots of poor communication in the secondary. Lots of loose coverage at times that is okay, I guess, if you can come up and make tackles. And that Oklahoma game really hurt us because we didn't make tackles. We're 1 out of 6 in the last 2 games in those critical drives we keep talking about. Those are the last drive of the first half, the first drive of the second half, and then the last drive of the second half. And we're talking defensively. 1 out of 6. Oklahoma converted and got points on all 3 of those. Houston got points on 2 of the 3. Did have a couple guys out in the secondary most of those 2 games. Jalen Catalon, safety, was out. Ryan Watts, the boundary corner's been out since Wyoming. Out since Kansas. Catalon went out real early in the Oklahoma game. He didn't play at all in the Houston game. Ryan Watts hasn't played at all since the KU game. So for all intents and purposes, both of those guys have missed the last 2 games, and Ryan Watts is a 2-year starter. I think Ryan Watts' presence has been missed sorely in that secondary. I've watched Ryan Watts for the last year and a half, and nothing really like blows up about him. Like nothing really pops out at you about his play. But I sure do notice it when he's not out there. So I think Ryan Watts is one of those guys that's just consistent. He's consistently doing what he needs to be doing. He makes tackles when it's time to make tackles. It's looking like both those guys might be back this week. If they are, that will be huge for this defense. The other thing we've had to deal with defensively the last couple of weeks is quarterbacks that could run. We saw Dylan Gabriel really hurt us with that. And I think even though Donovan Smith didn't hurt us with it, I think when you go into a game knowing that the quarterback has that ability, it sort of changes your mindset on the defensive line, changes your mindset from a linebacker perspective. It's just something you always have to be aware of, and I think that slows you down in your other responsibilities. For a defensive lineman, he's not rushing the passer as hard. He's not on an all-out, I don't give a shit, I'm tearing my arms and legs off and everybody else's arms and legs off trying to get to this quarterback. Because a running quarterback, a little bit of seam, bam, they're gone. You have to be a little more disciplined in your lanes and things like that. From a linebacker perspective, same thing. You're always kind of eyes on that quarterback, eyes on the running back, or the receivers. Eyes on the quarterback, eyes on the receiver. So you get behind in coverage. This week they got Caden Slovis, and I'm pretty sure he's a statue back there. So maybe Coach PK is more comfortable attacking him with pressures. Maybe we get some more pressure. We talk about it all the time. Defensive line is the secondary's best friend. The longer that quarterback has to stand back there without being uncomfortable, the more likely he's going to find somebody that's open and deliver a ball. I think it's going to be important for this defense this week to step up as Maalik Murphy makes his first collegiate start. Question number 2, does Sark change the game plan any without his starting quarterback? So Quinn Ewers out. In comes Maalik Murphy. You could tell Steve Sarkisian was super comfortable with Quinn Ewers. He says he's comfortable with Maalik Murphy. If that's truly the case, I don't think we'll see a whole lot of difference. Maybe some more running. Maybe lean on that running game a little more, which wouldn't hurt my feelings. BYU is terrible against the run. Like, absolutely. I mean, they're almost the worst team in the country against the run. Pardon. I'm wrong on that. They're not great against the run. So Texas got a really good stable of running backs. They could rotate those guys in and out and just kind of wear BYU down, chew up some time, win a game like that, kind of old school style. They could. Maybe some more quick throws, easy throws. Or the other thought is, does he just go the other direction? I think BYU is going to load up the box to try to stop the run. I think defensively, that's their best strategy. Try to shut down the Texas running game, make them one-dimensional. Maybe that offense can get some scores. You get Texas behind a little bit. Apply that type of pressure. Then I think Sark goes to the passing game and you know, you don't know what a guy that's never started a collegiate football game is going to do at the quarterback position. But I think if they do load up the box, I think you're going to see a lot of passes down the field. Maalik Murphy has really good touch. He's very accurate on the deep ball. It'll be really interesting to see how BYU tries to attack Texas defensively. Well, Texas finally put 4 quarters together against an inferior opponent. We had a mailbag question earlier this week. What can the coaches do to ever get this team to play 4 quarters? So far, it seems like the only thing they can do is schedule Alabama. If they could just play Alabama every week, Texas would give you 4 quarters every single week. We've seen this team start fast, fade late, and hang on to win. We've seen them start slow, explode late to win. We've seen them start slow, play pretty well after that for the majority of the rest of the game, and then fade late and lose. Team's still pretty banged up. I know Sark said a lot of these guys are week to week that have been banged up since, you know, Oklahoma, Wyoming, KU. And these aren't just These are like a lot of like guys that contribute at a high level. Quinn Ewers, obviously, your starting quarterback, who's having a hell of a year, man. I hate it for Quinn. Hate it to see him get hurt like that again. Got to back up in his first collegiate start. We talked about that. So this defense got to start fast. They got to remain focused for 4 quarters, and they got to finish strong. I'm not saying Texas can't afford to get behind and Texas can't afford to give up a lot of points to BYU, because I don't know the answer to that. But I'll tell you this, it'd be so much easier on that backup quarterback. It'd be so much easier on Maalik Murphy if the defense can go out and pitch one of those shutout type games. I'm not talking about a 0 score. I'm just talking about a game where the entire game, the defense is in control of everything that's happening. And the scoring is very, very limited. Been talking about it forever. The talent is there on this roster to do that. The staff is capable of leading a team to do that. There's no reason that this team cannot play fast, aggressive, and physical for 60 freaking minutes of football. They have got to do. I don't know. I don't know what it is, man. And you know, you hear Sarkle say, he'll say, you know, I was really impressed with the team's effort. You know, we never gave up. We played hard. It's not just about playing hard. It's about playing smart. And that's where this team's biggest weaknesses are in sort of the mental aspect of the game. Physically, there may be only a handful of teams in the country that can compete with them physically. Mentally, there's a whole lot of teams that can compete better than them. You talk about penalties. You talk about not being where you're supposed to be. You talk about not communicating in the secondary, leaving guys wide open in critical situations. That's where this team gets beat. I am not afraid. I would line this team up, all else being equal. I would line this team up physically with any team in college football and be confident that not only could they compete, but they would win physically most of those games, if not all of them. Got to play 4 quarters. Have to start it now. You have to make it a habit. Start making it a habit now, so by the end of the season, it's a habit. When the games start counting more, it's a habit. Last question, question number 4 of Sean's big questions of the game. Is this possibly the beginning of the Maalik Murphy era at the University of Texas? And what do I mean by that? I don't know what I mean by that. It's just a question. We don't know how long Ewers is going to be out. He, you know, Coach Sark says he's week to week. And that's just Coach Sark speak. It's not a lie. He is kind of week to week. They're gonna assess him every single day. He's really day to day. They're gonna assess him every single day. They just know it's not happening this week. It's probably not happening next week. I mean, I think minimum on some. Listen, I separated my AC joint in my shoulder. It is very painful. There's not a lot structurally wrong there. Like, you can't really hurt it any more than it's already hurt, but it's really painful. You don't have mobility, and this is in his throwing shoulder. I remember it was about a week before I could really raise my arm up above the level of my shoulder without there being just really intense pain in that joint area. So for a quarterback, that's a no-go. Like, you just can't do it. So I think after, 2 or 3 weeks, it's probably a pain tolerance thing. It's grade 2. I mean, I hope he comes back as quick as possible, but I think there is a possibility that Quinn Ewers might not play another regular season game this season. It's a possibility. It's a long possibility, but I think it's possible. Grade 2 AC separation, they say like 3 to 6 weeks. We don't know how good or bad Murphy's going to be. Tell you what we do know about Murphy. We know he's really, really talented. This kid was a 5-star before he got hurt in high school. Ended up being a high 4-star. Maalik Murphy beat Quinn Ewers at the Elite 11 camp. Finished in the top 2. We know he's a leader. Coach Sark's told us that. You can see it on the sideline. We know his teammates like him. You could see that watching the game when he came in against Houston. There was one shot where he was warming up, and that's when it dawned on me that, oh, shit, Maalik Murphy's coming in the game. Quinn Ewers must be injured or something. You can see his teammates behind him. They are giddy. Just giddy that he's getting an opportunity to go in the game. And I don't think that's not a shot at like Quinn Ewers. I'm not trying to say nobody likes Quinn Ewers or anything crazy stupid like that. I'm just saying I think it's possible for the team to rally around multiple people at that position. And I think that probably whoever went out there for quarterback at Texas, whoever starts this game or whoever starts the subsequent games that Ewers can't start, I think the team's going to rally around him. I think a lot of these things about all of those people. We know Maalik Murphy's been in this system for about a season and a half. And guy, I know it's a spring game. He looked really good in that spring game. Just really impressive. I saw a guy on a message board the other day say, I've got like this eerie, strange calmness about the fact that Maalik Murphy's our quarterback. I don't feel all that wound up about it either. And I think that's crazy. We're going to find out, obviously. The one thing we just don't know is how he's going to respond. We don't know how he's going to respond to being the starter. It's different. It's different coming off the bench. You hear that all the time. You see it in baseball even. You see these situations where guys that are used to starting games at the pitcher position, you see it. You saw it a bunch of times here in Game 7s of both the ALCS and the ALDS. Starting pitchers came in late in the game to pitch a few innings. Sometimes that doesn't work out for them because it's different for them. It's not something they're used to. Sometimes backup quarterbacks come into games by necessity and have hell of a game. And then they come back to start the next one out of necessity. And they don't fare so well. It's different. There's like a different mentality of like someone just pointing at you on the sideline and going, get your helmet, you're in, versus you getting to think about it and you trying to prepare for it, mentally going into the game. I think probably what it is when you know you're going to be the starter the next week, you put a lot of pressure on yourself. And when you just get pointed to and someone tells you to get in the game, you don't have time to have any of that. You don't even have time to think about it. You're just there. So in that situation, you're relying on your training. You're relying on your practice, your reps. In the other situation, you're doing a whole lot of thinking, maybe not being as instinctive. Bonus question. Will we see Arch Manning on Saturday? And will there be a QB controversy at Texas once again? Guys, I don't think there's another fan base in the country that loves a good QB controversy like Texas Longhorn fans love a big QB controversy. Sims Applewhite, probably the biggest one that's ever happened at the University of Texas. Just an absolute civil war amongst the fan base about who should be the player, who should be the guy. Both sides of that discussion have legitimate arguments. Then you had Vince Young, the wide receiver. There was a whole contingent, Vince Young's freshman year, get his ass out of the quarterback position, get him on the field. He should be a wide receiver. You had Sam Ehlinger, Shane Buechel, however you say it, Buechel. That one didn't get as heated as Sims Applewhite, but I think it's kind of the same kind of thought process. And I think, again, both sides had good points in that little QB controversy that Texas fans made up. And then I think you look at it from an Arch perspective. I mean, you had people in the Texas fan base that never talked about Maalik Murphy. It was either Quinn Ewers or Arch Manning. It's like Maalik Murphy didn't exist. And I talked about it on my show way back during fall camp when the depth chart finally worked itself out, and that was kind of announced that Maalik Murphy was in fact the second string quarterback. I talked about how you had all these people that just automatically assumed it was Arch Manning. And they act shocked when it was Maalik Murphy. So now you look on message boards and there's all kinds of chatter about, Arch Manning. And I think until that dude gets on the field, there's going to be chatter about Arch Manning. I don't understand it. I don't think we're going to see Arch at all unless something just goes horribly wrong with Maalik Murphy. And I think the only two possibilities there really are some sort of injury, which God forbid does not happen, or he just doesn't play well. And we will certainly be hoping that that's not the case as well. I mean, if Arch Manning was the second string guy, and we've heard this too, we got two number twos, or Arch is really better than Maalik Murphy, but they're trying to redshirt him. Folks, if Arch Manning was better right now than Maalik Murphy, Arch Manning would have went in the game on Saturday at Houston when it was a 3-point game and the rest of your season is on the line. I guarantee you Steve Sarkisian didn't just gamble with that. He didn't go, I think we can probably get out of here with the third best quarterback on the team. We'll just keep saving that shirt for Arch Manning. The other thing is, I know he didn't do that because Arch Manning could have played a game. Arch Manning could play 4 more games without losing his red shirt. So in my mind, there is absolutely zero doubt that Maalik Murphy is the second best quarterback in that quarterback room today, right now. And I think Steve Sarkisian made that quite apparent during a press conference earlier this week, and he said, if the game was played right now, Maalik Murphy would be our starting quarterback. Time for a deep dive on those BYU Cougars. Man, we mentioned in the Quick and Dirty on Tuesday that BYU is pretty statistically bad. They are not in the top. They're not even close to the top 50 in any major statistical category, offense or defense, except for scoring defense. And when you really start to look at who they've played and you start looking at their margins against those teams and their averages, it gets worse for the BYU Cougars. Offensively, Texas is rushing the ball for 179 yards. BYU's rushing the ball for 79 yards. Texas passing the ball 289 yards a game. BYU's passing the ball 222 yards per game. Texas scores 34 points a game. BYU scores 27 points per game. If you look at their offensive margins, and all offensive margin means, folks, we've been calling it differential. I changed. I didn't like that. The way we measure these offensive margins is just the team's offensive production in those three categories, their average production, and then the averages of each team's defensive averages in those three categories. So when you talk about rushing margin, you're looking at Texas's average yards per game versus all the teams that they've played already this season's average yards per game rushing allowed. So positive is better here. That means that if you have a positive offensive rushing margin, that means that on average you run the ball more per game than the average of all of your opponent's rushing defense. So let's break them down a little bit. The offensive rushing margins for both of these teams, Texas plus 28, BYU minus 58. Offensive passing margin, Texas plus 63, BYU minus 3. Offensive scoring margin, Texas 9, BYU 2. So as you can see, in all three margins, not only does Texas lead in all three of those categories just on its face, but if you dig into the margins, dig into their opponents and what they allow in those three categories, Texas has a dominant advantage offensively on paper. Sacks allowed, Texas allowed 17 sacks this year, and that is just absolute not good. Don't like it. BYU's only allowed 10 sacks. So there's a place where BYU has an advantage over Texas offensively. Turnovers are even. Texas has turned the ball over 7 times. BYU's turned the ball over 7 times. Texas dominates all the offensive statistics, including all three margins. And again, BYU's only advantage offensively is they allow 7 less sacks than Texas does, which is pretty significant. Defensively, Texas is holding opponents to 98 yards on the ground per game. BYU is holding opponents to 150 yards per game on the ground per game. Passing, Texas is allowing 234 yards per game. BYU allowing 246 yards per game. Scoring defense, Texas is allowing 17 points per game. BYU is allowing 24 points per game. So on the defensive margins, negative numbers are better because that means you're holding opponents to less than the opponents you've played are averaging on the season. Defensive rushing margins, Texas is minus 47, BYU minus 27. Defensive passing margins, Texas minus 28, BYU plus 11. Defensive scoring margins, Texas minus 14, BYU minus 5. Texas is holding opponents on average to 2 touchdowns less than their scoring average on the season. So that's pretty good. BYU is minus 5. Minus is good. Negative number is good, just not as good as it's less than a touchdown. 2 field goals, basically. Sacks on the season, Texas has 17. BYU has 7. I was surprised to see that because Texas is not a good team. Texas is not ranked very highly in sacks. And BYU is just atrocious. Turnovers forced, Texas has 10. which makes them a +3 turnover margin. BYU has 16, which makes them a +9 turnover margin. I think that turnover margin is what kind of explains the fact that if you look at them statistically, just on the surface, they're not good, but they're 5-2. I think that, along with who they've played. Strength of schedule, and again, we look at Sagarin ratings. If there's better ratings out there, let me know. Texas has a 75.6 rating, which is good for 6th in the country. BYU has a 70.1 rating, which is good for 51st in the country. So we talked last time about how 75 and 70 sound really close, but they're not. They're 45 places apart. Texas's opponents' average strength of schedule 70.6. BYU's is 70, which that's really close. 70.6 would be good enough for the 47th best schedule in the country, toughest schedule in the country. 70 would be 53rd. So opponent-wise, opponent strength of schedule, both of these teams' opponents' strength of schedules are about even. Advantage Texas on their strength of schedule, though, by a pretty wide margin. I think the important thing to note here is statistics are fun. I didn't used to be a statistic guy. I just cared about the games and what happened on the field, what the scoreboard said at the end of the game. But I think statistics, analytics, all those things are important. There's a lot to be learned if you can dig into those numbers and sort of make sense out of all of them. But they don't really matter what's going to happen for one specific game. It can give you an idea. You could look at this game and say, you know what, on paper, there's no way BYU wins this game. Because if you look at it on paper, there's no way BYU should win this game. But Texas dominated Houston in a lot of these categories. It wasn't as bad as they dominate BYU on paper, but Texas certainly dominated Houston on paper. And Texas barely escaped with a 31-24 win down in Houston. Our score predictor predicted a 42-17 win. So, again, the analytics are cool. In the coaching game, they're certainly important. But all they really are for our purposes is a predictor. Random college football thoughts. And again, these aren't random. These are Texas football thoughts. Texas roster change, man. And this one, I would say it hurts, but that's so cliche. And I'm not hurt by it. I just don't like it. Redshirt freshman edge Chris Ross is off the team. And I don't know why. I don't know that. I mean, obviously somebody knows why, but it's not been released. As far as I know, it's not public knowledge why he's not with the team anymore. He's the guy we've been talking about all season that's, man, flashed early in the season. Made me have to go look up his roster jersey's number and go, who the hell is that guy? Ends up getting hurt in the Wyoming game. Haven't heard from him since. Haven't even heard about him since. Hasn't been mentioned in any of the, hey, so-and-so's injured, he's not going to play this weekend, or he's week to week. Just hasn't been mentioned. I don't know. I don't know. I don't know. All I can imagine is it's either some sort of personal issue, which if it is, best of luck to him getting all that stuff squared away, or it's some sort of discipline thing. And if that's the case, man, just another rough example of guys that have really good opportunities in front of them and just cannot act right. And I'm not saying that's what it was. I don't want to speculate. I'm not trying to say that's what it was. Just saying those are the only two things I could think it would be. And from a football perspective, I thought he was doing really well. And that's definitely a blow to the depth at the edge position. Big commit for the University of Texas this week. 5-star Ryan Mingo Wingo, my bad. Ryan Wingo out of Missouri. Number 2 wide receiver in the country, number 5 player nationally, according to 247 Sports. With that commit, Texas's class goes up to number 13. They were sitting at 16 or 17, I believe, on 247 Sports. On other rating agencies, they're up in the top 10 now. It seems like to me 247 Sports generally has Texas a little lower than the other recruiting services. I don't know. I'm not trying to say it's like I'm not trying to say they're targeting Texas. I just think whatever they're looking at, it generally leaves Texas a little lower than some of the other services. So I don't know. Doesn't bother. It doesn't matter. Ultimately, the guys are going to show up. If they can play, they'll play. If they're really, really good, the team will be really, really good. Or, the star numbers and all that bullshit, none of that crap really ultimately matters. There was tons of buzz about Ryan Wingo over the summer in Texas, and there was all these crystal balls that came out, sort of middle to late summer, and man, Texas fans were excited. And then all of a sudden, it just kind of stopped. And then here lately, there's been all this Mizzou buzz. He's made several trips out there. Suddenly, all the crystal balls started dropping like flies for Texas and going in favor of Missouri. And then kind of really yesterday, he announced yesterday, early in the day, there started to be some smoke, they say, that Texas may have like made up some more ground on Mizzou's late charge. And then I heard something that, I read something that he was a silent commit since the Wyoming game, which is the last visit he made to Texas. Ends up choosing Texas. All the Missouri fans lose their shit, and it has to be a money thing. Texas must have dropped a huge big bag late in the process, and that's why Texas got Ryan Wingo. Who gives a shit? That's the world we live in today. NIL is a thing. And everybody was all about this pay the players thing, and before this ever happened, I made the comment, I brought it up that, hey, there's some schools that can't keep up with the other schools in money. So you could conceivably kill these other programs because they can't afford to bring in players that can help them win. And when you don't win, nobody cares about you, and nobody buys your merchandise, and nobody buys your tickets, and nobody watches you play on TV. And slowly but surely, your program has to erode because you can't afford it anymore. I said that. It hasn't happened yet. We'll see. There's time. It's going to take time for that to happen. But you guys can't be pissed about the money, because that's the world we live in. And please stop referring to money as a bag. That is the most. There's like adult men that say, yeah, man, they must have dropped a bag. They just gave him some money, man. You sound so ridiculous saying dropped a bag. So anyway, Ryan Wingo is committed to the University of Texas, which is outstanding for Texas. Sooner fans did not like it a couple weeks ago when I called West Virginia quarterback Garrett Green Mountaineer Baker Mayfield. Got a lot of traction on TikTok with that one. Had a lot of upset Sooners, a lot of stupid comments like, Baker Mayfield lives rent free in your head. Man, I'll tell you the guys this. Baker Mayfield was a hell of a football player. Baker Mayfield would probably be one of the most likable guys to just kind of go, I don't like the team he's on, but he sure is fun to watch, and I'll watch just to watch him play. If he wasn't such a douchebag. My dislike for Baker Mayfield has absolutely nothing to do with his play between whistles. It has nothing to do with the fact that Oklahoma and Baker Mayfield beat Texas so many times while Baker Mayfield was there. It has nothing to do with that. And I know nobody's going to believe that, but that's 100% true. Baker Mayfield is just one of those dudes. He's like on my top 5 most punchable dudes list. Like, he's a dude that if I could get close enough to him, I might consider going to jail just to, like, scratch him off my top 5 most punchable faces list. And I honestly, when I watched that quarterback for West Virginia acting the damn fool when they scored that touchdown late against Houston, Baker Mayfield was the only thing that could compare to that. I've never seen another quarterback act like an absolute jackass for doing their job. Plus, they're both kind of little. They wear bandanas under their football helmets. And they run a lot. They run around a lot. They scramble. They, make play. Like, just watching him play, it reminded me of Baker Mayfield. I feel like those dudes are clearly like the same kindred spirit. They're like, maybe they're the same soul in similar bodies in different dimensions at the same time. I don't know. All I know is Garrett Green couldn't have acted more like Baker Mayfield if he tried at the end of that Houston game. So OU fans, don't be pissed at me because I called Garrett Green Mountaineer Baker Mayfield. Be pissed at Baker Mayfield for being such a douchebag. Tomorrow is Prediction Friday. We'll have our Trace Otra games for Week 9. I looked at it a little last night. I kind of got an idea of which games I'm going to pick. We'll pick 3 of them. We were 3-0 last week, trying to go 3-0 again. We'll have our 4 keys for the BYU game and a prediction. We'll probably have some other random college football thoughts. We might have just some Texas football thoughts that we'll throw in random college football thoughts. Check out the podcast anywhere you listen to podcasts. You can check us out on Twitter, TikTok, and YouTube at Horn Takes. Follow and subscribe. Won't cost you guys a thing. I would appreciate the support. You can email me at horntakespodcast@gmail.com with all your questions, comments, concerns, and criticisms. I love them all. You guys have a good Friday Eve. Get hooked, baby.